So Module 30 is looking at our human needs. So it is our motivation to eat and drink and actually even be daring. There are two questions we are going to answer in this module. The first one is, what biological and social factors underlie hunger? So a good portion of this module is going to look at eating behavior, hunger, obesity, things like that. The second question we're going to answer in this module is, how are needs relating to achievement, affiliation, and power motivation exhibited, right? So we're going to end up talking about that at the end of this chapter, our need to affiliate. We have this need for achievement. We have this need for power, right? All right, so that's what we're going to talk about in Module 30. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to discuss is the motivation behind hunger and eating. And I want to get some basic definitions out of the way first. The first one is obesity. Obesity is when your body weight is more than 20% above an average weight for a person of a certain height. So people of certain heights, whether that be 4'5" or 5'6" or 6 feet or 7 feet tall, whatever height there is for a person, there is an average weight that people of that height have. If you are more than 20% above that average weight, then you are considered obese. You could, however, be overweight. Overweight is where you're above the average weight, but you're not yet at obesity. The most widely used measure or test that we use to determine whether someone is of healthy weight is their body mass index or their BMI. It is difficult, though, to use BMI to determine whether someone is healthy or in shape, because controlling your weight is complicated, because there's so much more that goes into eating behavior than just what you put into your mouth. Now, this is figure 1, and this is at the top of page 309 in your textbook. And it's showing you how you can determine your BMI. You need to follow those steps. So you first need to indicate your weight, then indicate your height, and you want to divide your weight by your height. Then you want to divide the result, right, that you got by dividing your weight and height by your height, and then you get that outcome. And then you want to multiply that number by 703. That is your body mass index. So people who are considered underweight, they have a body mass index less than 18.5. People who are considered of normal weight, they have a body mass index of 18.5 to 24.9. Someone who is considered overweight has a BMI of 25 to 29.9. And someone who has a BMI over 30, they are considered obese. Now, there's a lot of problems with BMI, right? And my brother is a PA, and I remember one time he told me that BMIs are only in place for insurance companies to determine whether you are healthy or not. There are plenty of people who are very fit and very healthy, yet they may have a lot of muscle mass, and that makes their BMI much higher. So I think you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. You know, if you have a BMI over 30 and you're considered obese, yes, probably the majority of people are actually obese. However, if you do work out a lot and you are physically fit and you don't have any health issues, just because your BMI is over 30 doesn't mean that you're really unhealthy. So you have to keep that in mind also whenever you're talking about BMIs. All right, let's think about the biological factors that are in line with our regulation of hunger. So not outside factors, not social factors, not the media, you know, what you see on TV. These are your internal biological factors that have a play in your regulation of hunger. The complex biological mechanisms tell organisms whether they require food or whether they should stop eating. One important factor that comes into play is the chemical composition of your blood. And this is going to show with a change in level in your glucose. Glucose is a type of sugar that regulates your feeling of hunger. So first off, your internal biological factors, right? That changes with the chemical composition of your blood, and especially the changes in your glucose levels. It's going to regulate your feeling of hunger. Now, all of us have this hormone insulin within our bodies. And insulin leads your body to store excess sugar in the blood. So some people who are diabetic, they may need to take insulin because they don't have as much insulin. And so their sugar is either going to fall way too low or it's going to be way too high. You also have a second hormone that plays a role in whether or not you have this feeling of hunger, and that is the hormone called ghrelin. It communicates feelings of hunger to the brain. And there is some interesting research out there looking at ghrelin. Now, we just said that ghrelin communicates feelings of hunger to your brain. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is where in your brain does this information go? The hypothalamus in your brain monitors the glucose levels. There's a lot of research out there recently suggesting that the hypothalamus carries the primary responsibility for monitoring your food intake. However, how this occurs is not yet clear. So we do have this strong belief that the hypothalamus is 100% involved. We just don't know exactly how it's involved. One hypothesis suggests that injury to the hypothalamus may affect an individual's weight set point. What we mean by that is that there is a particular level of weight that the body strives to maintain. So this belief is that each of us have this weight set point that is determined. So it's kind of like homeostasis. If you have this weight set point and you go on a diet to lose weight, well, the set point is put in place that's going to cause you to eat more because you have to go back up to that set point. And so there is a lot of research recently determining and following this set point. We also have what is called our metabolism. Metabolism is the rate at which your food that you ate is converted to energy and expended in the body. So you can do things to increase your metabolism. You can also do things to decrease your metabolism. But metabolism is really important because it's going to determine how fast your food that you just ate is converted into energy. This picture is in your book at the top of page 310, and it shows that the hypothalamus acts as the brain's feeding center, and it is primarily responsible for monitoring your food intake. Now remember, the pituitary gland is where your hormones are developed. And so you can see that the pituitary gland is very much involved because we just talked about two hormones, both insulin and ghrelin, and how those were involved with your feeling of hunger. All right, so those are the biological factors or reasons behind why we may feel hungry. Those internal things that occur. The next thing I want to talk about are the social factors. So now we're talking about externally, outside of your body, what factors are involved with this feeling of hunger. So we start off by saying that the internal biological factors, do not fully explain our eating behaviors. They do explain part of it, but there are other factors that come into play. And some of those are the external social factors. We have societal rules in place for when we should eat, right? Morning, we have breakfast. Midday, we have lunch. In the late afternoon, early evening, we have supper. So those are our external social factors, that determine when we should be eating. We also have to take into account what we have learned about appropriate eating behavior. Perhaps you grew up in a family with overweight individuals, and so you learned that it's okay to eat a huge, vast amount of food at one sitting. Or perhaps you grew up in a family who really monitored what they ate, and so you've learned those aspects of eating. You also then have to take into account cultural influences. In certain, let's say, South America, African places, it is seen as very good to be of overweight, right? To be of someone who is overweight, because that shows that you have a lot of money to feed yourself. And so that's actually seen as a very good thing. In the Western culture, it's not so much seen as a good thing. And that's because we have a lot of this media attention on looking thin. Your individual habits also play a role here, along with what we may have learned through both classical and operant conditioning about food and its association with our comfort. There is something true about comfort food. If you feel down and if you feel sad and you eat something that you really enjoy, that's going to release some dopamine in your brain, and dopamine is going to make you feel better. So therefore it is comfort food. It's going to make you feel better whenever you're not feeling the greatest. So we have both biological factors and we have social factors that play a role in our response to hunger. The next thing that I want to look at is obesity. And what is the root of obesity? There have been many factors that have been proposed that we see as important to obesity. oversensitivity to external eating cues coupled with insensitivity to our internal hunger cues. So we have these external cues, right? What time of day it is. Should we be eating breakfast? Should we be eating lunch? Should we be eating supper? We also have cues with commercials on TV, right? We have commercials on the radio for various restaurants. So we may be overly sensitive to those external cues. However, we just talked about the biological factors. We definitely have these biological internal cues also, but we may be undersensitive or insensitive to those cues. So that's what this is saying, where we have this oversensitivity to external eating cues along with an insensitivity to our internal hunger cues. Some of us may have higher weight set points. And this is a lot of the research that I'm currently believing, right? That we do have this set point in place. And we strive to maintain that set point. We know that genetics may also play a role. There's also this hormone leptin. And some individuals who are obese have a higher level of leptin. Now, if we go back and we look at this weight set point hypothesis, this is showing that the presence of too many fat cells from earlier weight gain may result in the set point becoming stuck at a higher level. And so if it is stuck, even though you lost weight, you're going to try and get back up to that higher level that you were previous to losing weight. We also have what's called a settling point. This is determined by a combination of both genetics and environmental factors. And I think there is some truth in that. It's not just genetics and it's not just the environmental factors, but perhaps it is a combination of the two of those that play a part. Now, the opposite end of obesity is when we have eating disorders. Obesity is an eating disorder, but I'm going to focus more so on, extreme weight loss. So when we talk about eating disorders, we have both anorexia nervosa and we have bulimia nervosa. Okay? So first off, anorexia nervosa. This is a severe eating disorder where people may refuse to eat while denying that their behavior and appearance is unusual. And for someone who has extreme anorexia nervosa, they could pretty much look like a skeleton. But to that individual, they think there's nothing unusual about the way they look. And they may still think that they look extremely overweight. Now, bulimia nervosa is a disorder in which a person binges on large quantities of food, followed by purging that food up by vomiting or by other means. So it's still an eating disorder where they think that they're overweight, but they have this desire to then fill that hunger. But after they ate all of it, they feel extremely horrible about themselves, and so they purge all of the food back up again. Let's think about some of the various causes we have for eating disorders. So proposed causes of anorexia nervosa and bulimia. A biological cause, such as some chemical imbalance in the hypothalamus or the pituitary gland. So sometimes there may be this biological cause where you have this chemical imbalance with the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, which we already know from those biological factors that those are definitely involved with this sense of hunger. In your brain, the orbitofrontal cortex also may be involved. So the orbitofrontal cortex is involved with signaling when we should stop eating. So if there's some sort of abnormal functioning in the orbitofrontal cortex, we may not realize that we should stop eating. And also, perhaps there's a different processing of information about food by the brain. There may be also some genetic roots behind eating disorders. And then definitely, as you also heard me mention, in the Western world where we live, society has this valuation of slenderness and the parallel notion that obesity is undesirable. And we see that all around us. All right, I want to switch gears here a little bit, and I want to talk about our need for achievement, this striving for success we have. So we're going to talk about the need for achievement, the need for power, things like that in the remaining slides of this module. So what we mean by a need for achievement is that it is a person's desire to strive and achieve challenging accomplishments. People that have this high need for achievement are selective in picking their challenges. So they may tend to avoid situations where success will come too easily or that success is highly unlikely because they have this need for achievement, right? They want to be challenged, but they don't want the challenge to be too easy, or they don't want the challenge to be too hard to the point where they will not be able to achieve it. So they generally choose tasks that are of some sort of intermittent difficulty. Not too easy, not too extreme, like the Goldilocks, somewhere right there in the middle. So that would be people who have a high need for achievement. On the other end, people with a low need for achievement, they tend to motivate themselves primarily by a desire to avoid failure. So they may take the easiest challenge possible just because they know they can meet that challenge and they can achieve it. The measurement that we use for the person's need for achievement is called the thematic apperception test, or the TAT. Right? That is the measure we use to assess someone's need for achievement. It is the thematic apperception test, or the TAT. So what happens is the researcher or the examiner, they show a series of ambiguous photos. Photos that mean nothing, right? That's what we mean by ambiguous. And they're going to ask the individual to write a story that describes what is happening in that ambiguous picture. Who the people are in the picture, what led to the situation, and what the people are thinking or wanting. And then also what will happen next. So they see this ambiguous picture and they're told to write a story about it, involving all aspects of the picture. And then what's going to happen is the researcher is going to use a standard scoring system to determine how much achievement or the need for achievement this individual has according to the story that they wrote. The last slide looking at this need for achievement is what we're going to look here. We're going to look at the growth mindset. So what we're talking about is the belief that individual characteristics such as intelligence or the talent someone has or the motivation, those can all be developed through hard work. That is the growth mindset. I can become more intelligent. I can become more talented if I work hard enough. When we talk about this term grit, someone who has a lot of grit, it's the perseverance and the passion for a long-term goal. You have this need for achievement to do this, and you have the grit to see it through. That's the growth mindset. You can also have what's called a fixed mindset. And this is the erroneous belief that an individual's characteristics such as intelligence and talent and motivation, those are set at birth, and there's very little you can do to achieve those. Right? We say that's an erroneous belief because we know that's not true. But there are people who definitely have this fixed mindset, that they feel as though they do not have any control over what they've already been dealt with. So individuals that have this fixed mindset, they're not going to work as hard. And that can then lead to failure and this sense of self-defeat. We know that it is possible to develop a growth mindset and therefore then avoid a fixed mindset. All right, let's move away from the need for achievement and let's look at the need for affiliation. This is where you strive to have friendships. The need for affiliation, striving for friendship. Most individuals do have a need for affiliation. That's where they have this interest in establishing and maintaining relationships with other people. People that have a higher need for affiliation tend to be with their friends more, and they tend to be alone less. Now, we do know that gender plays a role here. Gender is a greater determinant of how much time is actually spent with your friends. So regardless of the affiliative orientation, female students spend a significant amount of time more so with their friends than what male students do. So we all have this need for affiliation. However, some of us, based on our gender, may have a higher need for affiliation. The last need that we have is this need for power, striving for impact on others. The need for power is a tendency to seek impact, control, or influence over other people. And it is your need to be seen as a powerful person. There tend to be some significant gender differences that are on display for this need for power. So men definitely that have a higher power need, they tend to exhibit high aggression, they tend to drink heavily, they're sexually exploitative, and they are competitive. Women, on the other hand, they tend to display their powerful needs with more restraint. So women can also have this need for power, but they're not going to go to the extremes that men tend to go with when they have this high need for power.